Welcome to AskBYS Podcast, a monthly podcast brought to you by Bainbridge Youth Services and its supporting sponsors. AskBYS Podcast connects parents to professionals that can provide support, education, and resources on a particular topic in parenting. The speaker's words and opinions are their own and do not represent the policies or opinions of BYS. My name is Shannon Ameling, and I am your host. I am here with Milagro Castilleja as our producer. We're recording live at the Media Arts Studio at BARN, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network. Today's episode is sponsored by Quick Lock and Windermere Realty of Bainbridge Island. We are happy to welcome our parent guest, Kirsten Ashmore, a Bainbridge Island resident and mother of two.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. And our professional guest, Dr. Judy Whitfield, clinical psychologist and school neuropsychologist.
Hi there. Nice
Welcome.
To see everyone.
Welcome. Good to have you. Today's episode is Childhood Evaluations, Replacing Worry with Curiosity. I'll give it to you, Kirsten.
Thanks, Shannon. Dr. Judy, I just wanted to start by asking you, what would be some of the first signs that your child should receive an evaluation?
Usually when my phone rings, parents have had some worries for a while, and they're not sure where to go with those concerns. I always trust parents as the best historians and reporters. Teachers, close second, and so on, people in the community, pediatricians, but you really do know when you've got that worry. Sometimes you carry it around for a long time and you don't let others know that you have it. You might approach the pediatrician first, but I believe that, what your gut is telling you and what your parenting instincts are telling you are valid. And so I recommend making a list of those things and writing them down so that you come prepared when you do have a meeting with me, that we can have an honest talk about that. So apart from that, though, usually behavior is the first sign. Okay. There's an adage in psychology that all behavior is communication, right? So even babies, they can't really speak yet, but they're behaving and they're trying to communicate. Adults do it by slamming doors or doing nonverbal things, and so we're all communicating, not just in words, but with behavior. So when a child is having what I'm using air quotes, a behavior, what are they trying to say? What is their frustration? What's happening? How are they trying to act that out? And then there's always the good old homework thing, where you're spending way too much time on homework and it's a battle and it takes a lot longer than it should. And it's a source of frustration and conflict at home. Homework is a good marker of that. And then avoidance. Kids will avoid what they don't like to do, just like adults do. We avoid things we don't like, and we gravitate toward the things we do like. So avoidance can look like lots of gaming, video, screen time, using the bathroom when it's time for homework. I need to sharpen my pencil over and over again, those kinds of things. So I think, all together, those concerns can come from the parent or just from curiosity, keeping your eyes open to what the behaviors are and trying to report those.
Yeah.
I've
noticed a lot of those in my own experience. So, during that time where you have noticed things that might trigger your thought around, hey, this might be, something I need to look into further, what would you recommend for first steps when those things start to occur? Like, what would you tell a parent they should start with?
Right. So typically parents will go to the pediatrician, and that can be helpful, or sometimes it's a wait-and-see approach. If you still have concerns, a lot of pediatricians are now branching out to consult with other folks in the community, so it's not just every question goes to the pediatrician. They can say, oh, I know someone in the community that can help, refer out. It might be an occupational therapist or someone like me or any number of things. So I would say if your concern still lingers after that, then consult a professional. And what that means is just having a talk. It doesn't mean going in with any game plan of I have to have a full comprehensive evaluation, and it's just consultation. And what consultation means is everybody who's involved with that child brings their information to the table. We look at it as a team and we say, what's going on with Johnny? And then we decide what to do from there. And it may be an evaluation. It may be any number of other things, parenting support, consultation with the school, referral to another provider, consulting back with the pediatrician. But bringing as much information to the table is, I think, the best way to start off, I say the process, but not knowing what we're doing yet at that point. It's just kind of a discovery phase.
Sure. So let's say you get to the point of this group of professionals deciding, yes, your child needs an evaluation, whether it's for ADHD, autism. I think that there's probably a number of things that a child might be exhibiting that an evaluation would be needed. So in that case, what should a parent expect?
Well, I can speak for my practice and the way that I run my evaluation process. I take a little bit extra time. They're not quick. They take a few weeks, but it's a very deliberate process. And there shouldn't be any surprises, throughout that process. From the very first meeting, I go over how things work and expectations and what your concerns are and look at all the information. But there shouldn't be any surprises at any point along that path, that journey all the way to the end. For the child, I don't use the word test. It can be triggering, if they're having trouble at school and they get frustrated or they get anxious when they have to have a test, and they want to perform, they want to do well. So I don't say test. I say activities, or I use all these other words, but I don't say test. And then I've thought about this a lot over the past 5 years or so I tend to talk about Goldilocks a lot with kids, even older kids, and they remember the story. We all remember the story about, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and, I kick it off by saying, she broke into the bear's house, basically, and used all their stuff, right? And then I get buy-in, and, it's a story about what's just right. So she sleeps in their bed, one is too hard, one is too soft, one's just right. And the porridge is too hot, too cold, just right. I think she sits in a chair or something. But so, and I think in general we have a lot of that in our culture. Small, medium, large. This triad of what's in the middle. Even when you go to the store, you get the generic groceries that are super cheap. You get the designer stuff, and then you get like the store brand, which is in the middle, right? So we're trying to find out what's just right for your child and what's comfortable for them. And when I tell them that story, I link it to adults because there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're fine the way they are. The adults are struggling, and the adults need to know where your just right spot is. Your teachers are trying their best, and they're teaching the way that they were taught how to be teachers, and depending on their training, your parents are parenting the way that they know best. And the adults are getting frustrated too. It's not just you, and the way that we find your just right spot is to do some activities with me, and I tell them where that is. There's a psychologist long ago, I don't know, maybe in the 1800s, Vygotsky, and he came up with a very fancy term, zone of proximal development, ZPD. Mm-hmm. And the zone is kind of like Goldilocks. What's your just right spot? So things are too hard. You can't do them at all, even with help, and you get frustrated. Things are too easy. You don't need any help. You got it. You're bored, right? Your zone is in the middle where you can learn, but you need a little bit of help from someone. And that's what teaching is. That's, teacher education programs go heavy on Vygotsky and talk about that. And it trickles into everything that a teacher does. They're trying to teach kids where they're comfortable. They're not trying to frustrate them, and they're not trying to have them be bored. So the problem is we've got 20 or 30 kids in one room, right? We're trying to find the zone for 30 kids, 30 brains. So that's the hard part. And that's, for me, that's what the point of an evaluation is, that there are no surprises. We walk through that process together. We involve the child as much as possible, and then we find out what's your zone.
I love that. So you've described the zones. What information should be provided to the evaluator, prior to that child going into the evaluation?
I love that you asked the question. I really do. I often spend some time in the initial meeting doing some counseling around what kind of information do you have and where are we going to find it, and then it's all this information gathering that happens before we can even achieve the liftoff, so to speak. So if it were like the magic wand question for me, if parents came in with all this information, what would it be, right? It would be, you've had a concern, you've maybe done a little bullet journal or something on your bedside table. I've had this concern since this time. I've talked to the school at this time. Maybe you have an email thread with a teacher. Anything that has to do with, school records, SBA testing, report cards, anything maybe from the pediatrician that might have been documented. Wherever you can get information, if you think about the evaluation not just being the testing and the numbers and the results, I'm a detective also. So yes, there's the numbers, but the numbers don't mean anything if there's no context.
Sure.
Right, so what I'm asking parents to bring is to give me the context, what those numbers fit into. What are the behaviors at home versus what are the behaviors at school? What are your concerns? How long have they been? My developmental history form goes all the way back to your pregnancy and birth history, so trying to remember that. I know we all try really hard to remember, but I think by age 8 or 10, we don't remember when they walked and talked exactly. So as much as you can bring, school meeting notes, anything that you have to come into the initial meeting with is helpful, because then it helps me to kind of shine a light in the places where I have to do more investigating with testing. And then a kind of a corollary to that is, it's a sensitive topic, but transparency about, I know it's scary, to call someone that you don't know and say, I have a worry, a concern about my child. I've had this concern for a while. But rather than having me try to kind of pull information out about sensitive things, I try to build a relationship, build rapport, build trust, so that eventually you're comfortable talking about things that might have been traumatic for you or your child. We just all came out of COVID, divorce, separation, substance use. Like, there's a long list of what, we call ACEs now. But talking about those things helps me to understand even more context. It's like putting a frame on everything in the end. Something like inattention, you could be inattentive for a ton of reasons. Lots of those ACEs will make you really, really inattentive. But the transparency part, I think, is the part that I struggle with the most as a clinician. Is I try to build the relationship, build the rapport, build the trust, and then try to understand, like, I feel like they're not telling me everything. I feel like there's something. And, the disclaimer, I guess, in the background is, like, I have ethical and legal obligations to hold that in confidence. And so I can't, and I shouldn't. I need to be very careful with that information, but it does help me understand your child in the bigger picture.
Right. So once the evaluation takes place and you've gotten, the upfront information from the parents, they're honest, they're providing you with all of those ins and outs, and you do your work, what are the things that the parents should really hone in on once that evaluation has been completed? Like, what's the most important thing?
So I've started doing something a little different before I just launch into results in my evaluation results meetings. I'll ask questions like, what would this mean for you? Before we even get into what is the diagnosis and the data, what does this mean for you and your family? And my evaluations, I hope, answer your initial referral question, which is usually based in a worry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So did I answer your question? Do you know your child better? I often ask, does this sound like them? Or am I completely off base? This is not your kid at all. And almost 100% of the time, yep, you got it. You're pretty spot on,
Right.
And then things start to make sense and it gets more clear. And it can be hard if it's a difficult diagnosis to deliver. I always say your child is the same child now as they are going to be in 5 minutes. Right? But again, no surprises. We would have had talked around that diagnosis anyway, so there shouldn't be any shock.
Sure.
At the end of that. But so you should have your feelings validated. You should have your questions answered. You should know what the next steps are. You should know where your child's strengths are always. And the evaluation will probably highlight those things that you already knew that they're good at. Right? And then you use the strengths to build up the areas where they're having challenges. Kind of like a block of Swiss cheese, right? There's still cheese, but there's some holes.
Right.
So we fill in the holes.
Yeah.
So that's my hope for, the end of the evaluation. And then sometimes it takes some thinking time and some processing, and then a week or two can go by and parents will call me back and say, we have some questions. So
yeah. Like
we'll
you said, some of these diagnoses can be difficult for parents to hear and then ultimately to digest. In those cases, and in the cases where, yes, like everything just makes sense, supporting the parents, right, is obviously super important. So if a diagnosis comes to fruition that is hard, what types of resources would you recommend for the parents specifically to kind of get through that time?
Well, I have read probably thousands of reports from other people all over the country.
Yeah.
Kids come from other states and even other countries with evaluations. And I've read all sorts, just like Goldilocks, good and bad and perfect, just right. And I'm not a fan of giving 5 pages of recommendations that are really websites and books to read. Mm-hmm. And I think you're already overwhelmed. You've voiced your concerns, your worries. We've had this conversation. We get to the end, and then I just give you a long sheet of websites to visit, which you probably have already been to all those websites anyway. So the recommendations that I give are the most kind of bang for your buck, so to speak.
Sure. I
break them into home and school and community. And I give maybe 3 under each. Okay. And they can be general, they can be quite specific. Like, okay, it's a writing disability, and yes, school can deal with writing, but there's also a motor component, and so consult an occupational therapist. So that, I think, gives you more than saying, go to the International Dyslexia Association website and read these things.
Right.
So, I've also had parents come to me with past evaluations, and I always ask, oh, hey, this is a pretty good report. Did you do any of these things?
Oh, interesting.
Right. And the answer is usually no. So in the back of my mind, I've been thinking, like, if I went back to grad school, I might do a study on why parents don't do the recommendations right after you've gone through this long, painful process.
Yeah.
It's overwhelm. It's 5 pages of websites, or it's join this association and go to this talk. And if you need ongoing consultation, I'm happy to keep doing that too and provide more targeted things. There are people in the UK doing things that we're not doing here in the States. So sometimes I'll say, hey, this is not firm on the books in the US yet, but this sounds like your kid in the UK is doing this other work.
Yeah.
But overwhelming parents with too many things to do and overwhelming our kids when they're already pretty full with school and extracurricular things, and then sending them to multiple therapies and tutors during the week, not necessarily the best answer.
Yeah. And are there specific recommendations, and again, it's going to vary from diagnosis to diagnosis, but like if you could just, I think you were just chatting about dyslexia, but for like a child with dyslexia, like, do you provide the parents with like a quick list of these are the things that I would recommend like immediately? Like you talked about occupational therapy and things like that. Like what would that look like?
So, yes. So depending on the profile, there are different routes to go, on what kind of tutoring, what kind of therapy is recommended. The problem that I'm having right now is that in Kitsap, we don't have providers. They're not there. And the people that are around, they're full, and we've got these huge wait lists. So it's been really challenging to try to give parents a specific referral, like go to this occupational therapist because they're very good with autism or they're very good with fine motor or sensory. I refer to 2 or 3 and they're getting full. So it's this constant, like, who's full, who's not. And I'll have parents call anyway and say, I think they might be full, but maybe they know someone. Right? So if I'm referring to that person, still ask the question, hey, Dr. Judy sent me. I know you might be full, but do you have a colleague? Or maybe they have an intern. Or someone else. And if anybody knows of any of these folks out in the community that I don't know about, I really do want to know them.
Right.
I want them in my, I was going to say Rolodex.
Yeah, you're in your network.
Yeah, they're my virtual Rolodex.
And I think you make a good point because I think for us parents that are dealing with these types of challenges, oftentimes we're looking for that professional with, that is on the psychology guild that has all the stars and all the reviews. But you mentioned interns. Like, is that could be a potentially good place to start?
Well, it could be. But again, interns, as far as I know, I go back to my multiple alma maters. And for example, when I finished UW in school psychology, there were 10 of us that graduated. Okay, so really 10 school psychologists for how many children?
Sure.
Just in the Puget Sound, just in Seattle. It's not going to cut it. It's just not. We're not preparing and, putting people out there quickly enough to deal with the demand. And then we've got, insurance issues on top of it. We have financial and equity issues, and it just keeps going from there. So finding resources, I think, it's critical. And BYS doing podcasts like this and sharing information with folks, finding a place where you can kind of get more local referrals is valuable. I'm constantly looking for more people to refer to. And I do think we need to give our school district folks a ton of credit because they are trained. They're working in public education with circumstances that are really difficult. Lack of resources, time, money, and energy are very low. But they do have the training. We do have OTs in public school. We do have speech-language pathologists in public schools. We do have a whole host of mental health professionals in school. So they're there. And again, back to Goldilocks, they're trying to find out this information because they want to do the best job that they can. No one is in public education if they don't really, truly care about our kids. I've never met one. I've been at it since about 20 years now. So they're all doing their best.
Yeah.
But their frustration is there as well.
Right. I hear you. The last question that I have for you, Dr. Judy, is, your thoughts on whether or not a parent should share the results of an evaluation with their child. So like the advantages, disadvantages.
Well, I would say yes, for the most part. Yes, share appropriately. The only disadvantage I would see to sharing would be if there's a significant mental health issue. And that I would refer to a mental health clinician, like a therapist or a social worker, a school counselor even, and work with that professional about how to open up that information to your child. So other than that, I would say yes, share as much as you feel it will be helpful and in a developmentally appropriate way. Again, parents know their kids the best. You know what your child can handle. You know what their concerns are and what their challenges are after we've gone through the evaluation. I give a menu of options to share results. So it can be parents and me alone. Mm-hmm. It can be parents and me alone for part, and then we bring your child in the end. And I usually almost always start with, hey, you're really smart. Look at these scores. Look at it.
Yeah.
Like, yay for you. We're celebrating. Or it can be, I share with the parents now, you have your digestion processing period in a week or two, then I can have your child come in and I'll talk to them separately. So any number of ways that works best for the family, but my philosophy on sharing the results is if someone said to you, we want to find out how your brain works best, and then we get your buy-in and you go through the process, and then you never find out, why did I do all of that?
Yeah.
It'd be a little kind of a letdown to not know.
Totally.
And depending on how old the child is, a young child, not as much info. A teenager, a high schooler, a young adult, yeah. But if we're talking about advocacy, well, we do. All the adults talk about advocacy, right? We say that a lot. And most kids don't really know what we're saying. We say, you need to be an advocate for yourself. And, but how do you do that if you don't know yourself? You don't know what you're advocating for. You don't know what your needs are. You just are, you're frustrated. You're upset. You hate homework or whatever. Your little brother annoys you, whatever the things are.
Yeah.
But are you going to go to your teacher, or are you going to raise your hand at math class and say, excuse me, teacher, I don't know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, I won't. I don't do it. I'm a grown-up. I went to a conference last month, and I did not raise my hand for 5 days. I waited until lunch. I sent an email, I waited for happy hour, and I chatted up the speaker.
Yeah.
But there's no way in a room of my peers I'm going to raise my hand and put myself out there. So, but our students, we're expecting them to be an advocate for themselves, but we don't teach those things. And from evaluation standpoint, it's them knowing what their strengths are, or them knowing, hey, I do better when I keyboard. Oh, this makes sense now. I can keyboard and I can write this awesome essay, and I can keep spell check off and figure it out and then turn it on at the end and do my edits. Coming through a process that is adapted to them, and then they can say, hey, teacher, this works great for me.
Such a good point.
We write 504s without the student involved, or we write an IEP without asking them anything.
Yeah. And
then we just do things to them. And I'd like to do things with them, not to them.
Yeah, I think that's super important.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up the 504 and the IEPs because I think it is. It's really important to bring them into the conversation around those.
Yeah, as they're comfortable, but we have to plant the seed somewhere and start.
Thank you so much, Kirsten and Judy. for allowing us to be part of your conversation today. And thank you all who have joined us. We hope that this conversation proves to be of benefit to you in your parenting. We leave you with the foundation that healthy youth begin with healthy families, and healthy families build healthy communities. BYS is a nonprofit organization that is supported by community members like you. For more information, please visit AskBYS.org. We thank Milagro Castilleja for producing our show. Another big thanks to Barn, the Bainbridge Artisan Resource Network, for their generosity in allowing us to record in their media arts studio.